Daily Detroit is brought to you by the community. Support our work at patreon.com/dailydetroit.
Hey, it's Jer, and welcome to episode 662 of your Daily Detroit for Monday, December 21st, 2020. The $400 million worth or so of development happening at the State Fairgrounds site in Detroit for the new Amazon distribution center has turned a lot of heads. The project promises to create as many as 2,000 jobs at the Amazon facility, not to mention the developments nearby on the same parcel. But it's not without some questions and pushback. The part we'll talk about today, since the Fairgrounds is a site with generations of history, should the long-standing buildings like the Coliseum and the Bandshell be preserved somehow instead of demolished? And what about transit connections? A quarter of Detroit households don't have a car, and buses are a way lots of people here get to work. Our feature conversation raises some questions and gives us some historical context. Dave Gifford is a regional community and transit advocate who also has a passion for music. He wrote an interesting piece that appeared on Medium and in the Metro Times that I'll link to in the show notes. And we dive into the question, could this, with some adjustments, be a much better development than it is? Then I'll share 3 things to know around town, including an update on coronavirus relief. Marathon is looking to create a green zone near their Detroit refinery, and an update on community benefits money on Detroit's east side. Let's just dive in, shall we? Joining me virtually is Dave Gifford. He is the founder of Transit Guide Detroit, as well as a vocal person around what's happening in our region. Dave, we've seen each other on Twitter a ton of times, but welcome to Daily Detroit.
Well, thanks for having me.
So today's topic is pretty close to the hearts and minds, and frankly, the memories of many Metro Detroiters, the State Fairgrounds. The conversation has been around Amazon taking over a large chunk of it for a facility that is supposed to bring jobs, supposed to bring investment, but it's not a clean-cut story because this area it's not like it's a green field. The State Fairgrounds have a ton of history for people. Dave, can you kind of outline a little bit of that, and specifically why you're so concerned about the Bandshell, which is frankly something that I remember seeing as a kid, but I don't think I realized the importance of.
Yeah, I think because the fairgrounds have been closed since 2009, it's been 11 years, and it's kind of faded into the memory of people. It seems like a lot of people have forgotten what's exactly there because no one's really been there in a long time. So the fairground land itself was actually purchased in 1905 by Joseph Hudson of Hudson's in Detroit. And he didn't want to run it, so he sold it to the fairground organization for $1. And they held the fairgrounds there ever since. Actually, the fairgrounds has been going, I think the state fair has been around for over 150 years, starting sometime in the middle of the 1800s. And it only moved there until 1905. So they started building up the grounds there, and there was a racetrack at one time, and all the different exhibition buildings were built. The 3 large ones on the north end were built in the 20s. The Coliseum and the agricultural building and the dairy barn were all built 22, 24, and 26. The Bandshell wasn't actually built until 1938. And the first year that was used, Benny Goodman was the headliner.
Wow. So some great acts have come through there.
A lot. I couldn't find a lot of information online about the Bandshell in particular, but I found a site that had somehow someone put together a whole list of every concert that's ever been held there. And they even had links to flyers and newspaper information about each show. And you had people coming through from R&B and soul and swing and blues festivals held there, and jazz festivals and rock concerts, all kinds of things.
Well, and this is part of a greater question around the State Fairgrounds project, where I think to some residents, it felt like a thing that kind of happened kind of quickly, where it's like, oh, well, we're going to throw in a transit center. We're going to do these things. But in the process, we're going to demolish a lot of historic buildings. It's kind of torn people in the community. I've heard strong opinions on both sides. With the State Fairgrounds project, how much Detroit history is going to be erased?
It looks like what they're proposing, pretty much all of it will be erased from there. They're going to tear down everything on the entire site is what's kind of being planned. They intend to study the 3 historically designated buildings on the north end for about 3 months to see if they can reuse them or possibly move them, but most likely they'll be torn down.
Why do you think that this particular thing has gained so much traction? Like, you put out a post, it got shared by a number of outlets, including the Metro Times, and then there was a petition on top of that that's gained some steam. Why is this resonating with people?
I think out of a lot of things in Detroit, there's a lot of history in Detroit, and a lot of buildings have been trying to be saved. And this one, I think music really resonates with people over everything else. Concerts, people have a lot of memories with their family and going with themselves. Detroit is Motown. We had the Motown sound, and so much history has happened here. So music is really a part of our DNA here. And to hear all the musicians that have been through there and the stories from people that have gone there themselves, I think it really hit home with them.
I'm going to get into some proposed ideas or solutions if you've got any, instead of tearing this stuff down. But I think I'd be remiss, especially because you're Transit Guy Detroit, like this is your game, right? To not talk about this transit center. Some of the details that you started to share around it, initially it was said there was going to be $7 million put towards a transit center. Then you mentioned about how 2 of those are going to be put towards demolition, leaving about 5. What are your thoughts around this transit center? I know that the State Fairgrounds Loop, if people don't realize, that was a place where even the streetcars made a turnaround, where the buses are today. Streetcars like that State Fairgrounds Loop has been a thing. This would move that entire setup into the middle of the parcel, which kind of changes the feel of it. What are your general thoughts about it? And do you have concerns from a transit perspective?
Yeah, there's a lot of concerns as far as the regional connection. Currently, there's about 8 or so smart bus routes that stop there and about 6 DDOT bus routes that stop there. So it's really more of a regional transit center. Some of the routes wouldn't be affected. It would be fine for them to move off of Woodward. But the big one is the fast Woodward bus, which goes all the way up to Auburn Hills now, to Great Lakes Crossing and back 7 days a week. That one most likely won't deviate off of Woodward. And if we ever do pass a RTA plan, the plan all along was BRT service, which is bus rapid transit. It's all-day bus service in its own lane, so it has dedicated lanes. That would very unlikely deviate off of Woodward, which would really have a disconnect for this new transit center. It'd be about a half-mile walk from the other side of Meyer all the way over to there, which would make things worse than it even is now.
Well, people who drive through there have gone to that Meyer and things. They may not realize, because they're always in a car, just how big that gap is. I used to live in the University District around the corner. I've used that State Fairground Transit Center. I've tried to go to the Meyer, the different things. If it's a nice day, it's not the worst walk in the world, but it is a long walk, especially if you're somebody who isn't, say, an able-bodied person, to connect to all of these things. In this town, it's this idea that, well, if we do a bus, it's fine. But I wonder if this is an opportunity to maybe reuse some of these buildings that are there. Like, I know that there's like a coliseum and things like that. Are any of those ideas something that transit folks are behind?
Yeah, there's been discussion. I sat in a couple of the meetings with DDOT and the citizens. Thanks to the Zoom meetings and COVID, it's actually been kind of a blessing that more people can participate, because some of these meetings happen at times when people are home for dinner and things like that. So we're all able to get online. One of the things that was proposed was they could use one of those coliseums as a transit center. The buses could pull in and be out of the weather. You could have space for retail. You could have all kinds of different things there and reuse the building that's there rather than tearing it down. DDOT mentioned maybe just keeping a facade, which is kind of a popular thing to do, where you just keep a wall and kind of say, oh, this is historic here. We left the wall, and integrate that into the center somehow. But it doesn't really go to saving the building.
Well, and for the uninitiated, how important are those regional connections? Because when I look at a map of car transit, I see that a lot of people go a long way to get to jobs in this region.
Oh, certainly. Aside from a few buses that transfer at the city border, there's only 3 that go all day, and that's Gratiot, Woodward, and Michigan Avenue. But people need to go a lot further than those places. So a lot of times they're transferring off of buses and getting on the different routes. And sometimes those transfers can take a half hour or an hour. If you miss one especially, that'll really set you back and make you late for work or possibly lose your job even. So having those kind of connections and transfers are very important.
There was a lot of criticism when the Q line went in that it'd be like for really fancy people wanting to go around greater downtown Detroit. But outside of that, when it comes to transit, it actually is kind of a hand up, because we have a lot of geographic distance in our region. And without the ability to get places, doesn't that kind of lock people in poverty?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. It's hard to reach the jobs out in the suburbs when you can't get there on time. And a lot of areas are completely inaccessible. Hospitals and factories and things like that, which is kind of brings us back to why they were so intent on building Amazon in Detroit, was because we need jobs in the city instead of outside the city for Detroit residents. That's why there was a push for helping out with the addition for Chrysler down in the Counter Creek area. There was a new flexing gate that went in where they took an old neighborhood that was all gone. They took the street grid and they built a big warehouse there for Detroit residents to work at.
That's a couple of miles east of me here in the north end, just over there near Van Dyke and things like that. It's near the old St. Cyril.
Okay, yeah. So there's a push to try to get factory jobs back in Detroit like it was at one point.
Do you think all of this can work together? So like if you look at building a quality transit hub, and then you look at the idea of saving this Bandshell, with it could actually, people could use transit and then go to the Bandshell and enjoy it as a venue, and Amazon. Do you think all of these things can coexist, or is it an either or?
I think they can coexist. There just has to be the will to want to do that.
And that coexistence you think is better for not just the city, but the region, because you're somebody who really looks at things with more of a regional lens with all of the work that you do. I mean, that's the thing that if people follow your Twitter, if people follow your advocacy work in general, you're always looking at it in like a bigger picture kind of way, which is something that I appreciate.
Oh, certainly. Like the thing that makes downtown special in Detroit is not all the parking. It's the buildings, the places to go, the places you can actually exist at and walk around. Even the stadium district right now is quiet and is dark because nothing's happening there. But it's the downtown, it's the buildings, the history, and the warmth of a place where people can come and gather. And the state fairgrounds was, for over 100 years, a place where people came together and from all walks of life and from all parts of Michigan and the whole region, really. I'm sure Canada and Ohio and like other places in other states all came to the state fairgrounds to compete and to walk around and exist and hear the music and everything.
I mean, I lived through 20 years of my uncle having to see the butter cow as a kid. Like the butter cow was the thing, right? Like,
yep, it was still there in the last year too.
Yep, everyone got really excited about it, and that was the thing that Uncle Tim had to go see. Well, Dave Gifford, where can people find you if they want to follow you, get involved, and learn more about what you're doing?
I've got a website, transitguidedetroit.com, and it has access to all my blogs and links to all the bus and transits that we have in Metro Detroit, and also links to my Twitter and Instagram, which my wife runs all my Instagram and does the photos for that.
Oh, no wonder they look so nice.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Well, best to you and yours, and good to talk to you, sir.
Thanks, you too.
One thing to note after we recorded this interview, Amazon released a statement Monday morning saying that they appreciate the sentimental and historic value of the Bandshell, and they will work closely with the developer to assess every possibility to try and preserve the structure. We'll see if it pans out, but it's a sign they heard the criticism, huh? Here's what else you should know today. First, an update on COVID-19 restrictions and relief packages in Michigan. As cases per day and case rates per 100,000 people continue to decline here, the Michigan Department of Health has lifted a number of restrictions effective today. Indoor venues like movie theaters and bowling alleys can reopen if you're wearing a mask, with no concessions sold. In-person classes can resume at high schools, so can outdoor group fitness and outdoor non-contact sports. Casinos can reopen too. MGM and Motor City in Detroit are opening Wednesday. Greektown has yet to announce a reopening date as of this recording. They're currently working on finishing their Barstool-branded sportsbook. College classes have been asked to start a little bit later than expected, on January 19th. However, indoor dining is still shuttered through at least January 15th. Governor Gretchen Whitmer said that all of this would be reviewed throughout the holidays. The key here is keeping your mask on, as a number of health professionals have found that indoor dining ups your chances of getting COVID-19 significantly, and that's because, well, you got to take your mask off to eat or drink. Our test positivity rate statewide has dropped from more than 17% to just under 11%. Also, the State House and Senate overwhelmingly passed a $465 million relief bill that was signed today by the governor. Nearly half of the money goes to extend unemployment benefits through March. There's also money for hazard pay for frontline workers, funding for vaccine distribution, grants of up to $20,000 each for small businesses, some direct aid for Michigan residents if you qualify, money for coronavirus testing in nursing homes and long-term care facilities, as well as grants of up to $40,000 each for live music and entertainment venues. The Marathon refinery by I-75 near the city's Boynton neighborhood is looking to create a so-called green belt or buffer in southwest Detroit. To do this, they've announced a $5 million program to buy residential properties east of I-75 and north of Schaefer Highway. Here are the nuts and bolts for homeowners in the area that spans about 30 city blocks. Marathon is offering the appraised value of the home, or $70,000, whichever is higher, plus an additional premium of half the appraised value in certain circumstances. Lots that aren't habitable would be purchased for $2,000, or $5,000 if it's along Schaefer Highway. There's money for moving assistance and bank fees for a new mortgage as well, and the program may be extended in the future years with additional dollars. It's a voluntary exercise, and it'll be interesting to see how many people take up this offer and what questions arise as we learn more. And finally, Fiat Chrysler has announced they're paying out $400,000 to a Detroit neighborhood fund, and will again next year as part of their community benefits agreement to build their new plant on Detroit's east side. The money will be focused on the Chandler Park, West End, and Riverbend neighborhoods near the facility. Who gets the dollars is chosen by a group of community members and the Detroit Planning and Development Department. Additionally, $285,000 is going to a group we highlighted on this show recently, the Chandler Park Conservancy. That money will reportedly go to an environmental education plaza. And that's all for your Daily Detroit. Thanks so much for listening. Also, thanks to you cool people who have dropped new 5-star reviews for us on Apple Podcasts. It's pretty neat, and thank you. As a heads up, by listeners' request, I intend on being on the air or in your podcast feeds quite a bit over the holidays. We have some great conversations coming up for you, and we'll keep you company through all of this. And of course, the all local stories to know will not stop. With that, I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and I'll see you around Detroit. Talk tomorrow.